Good morning. It's April 12th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the International Monetary Fund, trimming the 2023 economic growth outlook for South Korea. The IMF has cut the projection once again, this time from 1.7% to 1.5%. That's already the fourth consecutive cut by the international agency. South Korea believes the U.S. has no spiteful intentions regarding the recent drama involving Washington eavesdropping on Seoul's top office, and that the leaked classified documents were fabricated by a third party. From today, the world's oldest metal print book, Korea's Jikji 심체 요절, will go on public display in France for the first time in 50 years. The International Monetary Fund has slashed South Korea's economic growth projection by 0.2 percentage points to 1.5%. This comes as the UN's financial agency expects the global economy to face rocky economic recovery this year. Our 신세벽 starts us off.
The International Monetary Fund on Tuesday cut its 2023 economic growth outlook for South Korea to 1.5%. That's down 0.2 percentage points from its estimate in January. It's also slightly below the Bank of Korea's projection of 1.6% made in February. The IMF did not explain the reasons behind the adjustment to its outlook, but it could be largely attributed to growing concerns that aggressive monetary tightening policies may impede global economic growth. In fact, earlier in the day, the BOK froze its key interest rate at 3.5% for the second time straight due to growing concerns over an economic slowdown. The 1% range projection for South Korea is on par with projections for other major economies. The IMF expects the U.S. economy to grow 1.6%, Japan's 1.3%, and Canada's to see 1.5% growth. But this would mark only the fifth time in history that South Korea's economic growth fell below 2%. The last time it grew below 2% was in 2020, when the Korean economy contracted by 0.7% during the COVID-19 pandemic. Meanwhile, the IMF said the global economy faces a rocky road to recovery in 2023, edging down its global economic outlook to 2.8%. That's 0.1 of a percentage point lower than its previous forecast. The organization said lingering global economic uncertainties, such as the war in Ukraine and persistently high inflation, are affecting growth. Despite these grim figures, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, in a news conference on Tuesday, was rather optimistic about the outlook.
I do think the outlook is reasonable. It's certainly stronger, brighter than the last time we had the annual meetings in October. I wouldn't overdo the negativism about the global economy.
Yellen said a number of economies, including the United States, were proving resilient with strong labor markets, easing supply chain problems, and lowering energy costs. She also said the global financial system was also resilient due to reforms enacted after the 2008 financial crisis. 신세벽, Arirang News.
2 out of 3 Wall Street banks believe the U.S. Fed's key interest rate will reach the 5 to 5.25% range. The Bank of Korea's New York office last Friday conducted a survey of 12 U.S.-based investment banks, asking what level they believe the U.S. Fed's key interest rate will reach before hikes stop. 8 investment banks predict that the key interest rate will reach the 5 to 5.25% range. In response to the same question last month, only 3 of the banks predicted those figures, with most of the participants predicting a range of 5.5 to 5.75%. They cited instability in the banking sector due to the fallout from the Silicon Valley Bank collapse as the main reason for the latest outlook. South Korea believes that there is no substantial evidence of the U.S. spying on Seoul with malicious purposes, amid such allegations stemming from the recent leaks of U.S. military documents. Now, that's according to Principal Deputy National Security Advisor Kim Tae-hyo speaking to reporters as he arrived in Washington, D.C. for talks about preparations for an upcoming state visit to the U.S. by President Yoon Suk-yeol. That's in line with previous remarks made before his departure that the defense chiefs of Seoul and Washington spoke by phone and agreed that much of the purported information in the leaked document was forged. The security official added that there'll be no message by Seoul to Washington on that matter, given that the materials are fabricated by a third party. In its annual diplomatic blue book released on Tuesday, Japan has once again excluded its pledge to uphold apologies to South Korea over wartime atrocities and has insisted on its false claims to South Korea's Dokdo Island. Seoul's foreign ministry called in a Japanese official to protest against such unjust, invalid arguments. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji has more.
Last month, the South Korean government announced its plan to compensate the Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor through a public foundation, instead of through the Japanese firms found guilty by a South Korean court. At the time, Japan's foreign minister said he hoped the solution would help restore ties between the two countries, and said the Japanese government will continue to uphold the apologies it made in the past.
On this occasion, we confirm that the Japanese government continues to uphold the stance on historical recognition made by previous cabinets as a whole, including the joint declaration between Japan and South Korea made in October 1998.
But Japan made no mention of this in its newly published Diplomatic Blue Book, an annual report on the country's foreign policy and activities released by Tokyo's foreign ministry on Tuesday. Regarding the issue of compensating wartime forced labor victims, the report noted that Seoul and Tokyo have been discussing it since President Yoon Suk-yeol took office in May, through diplomatic channels and at the recent summit between the two countries' leaders. The report did not explain the fact that Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi has said the Japanese government will uphold the stance made by previous cabinets, including the joint declaration between South Korea and Japan in 1998. The joint statement in 1998 between former South Korean President Kim Dae-jung and former Japanese Prime Minister Keizo Obuchi includes Tokyo's deep remorse and heartfelt apology for causing tremendous damage and suffering to Koreans during its colonial rule. The latest report from Japan also claimed that South Korea has maintained an illegal occupation of Dokdo Island, which they refer to as Takeshima. Japan has been insisting this in its annual diplomatic blue book for 6 years, since 2018. In response, South Korea's foreign ministry called in Naoki Kumagai, the deputy chief of mission at the Japanese embassy in Seoul, to protest. Also, the ministry spokesperson said in a statement on Tuesday that Japan should immediately retract the unjust sovereignty claim to what is a part of South Korean territory historically, geographically, and under international law. He added Japan should be aware that repeating such claims does not contribute to the building of a future-oriented relationship between Seoul and Tokyo. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
As widely expected, the Bank of Korea opted for another rate freeze for the country's interest rate on Tuesday. That means the central bank could be one step closer to ending its vicious rate hike cycle. But is that really the case? And if so, what's next? For more, we're joined by Professor Song Soo-young from Chungang University. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, good morning to you, and thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for joining us. The central bank named inflation forecasts above the target level and financial risks broadening in major countries for its latest rate freeze decision. Professor, is that so? I mean, what other factors played a role in keeping the rate at 3.5%?
Yeah, Chairman of Bank of Korea has mentioned that the turmoil which has been reverberated around the world in the U.S. and in the European international bank, investment banks such as Credit Suisse. However, that is just a reason that is proposed as a financial sector's problem. However, in Korean domestic economy has suffered so much from some upcoming recess. I believe that Korean economy is now in the recess, or just starting of the recess, because of the recently the turmoil in the short-term corporate bonds market, such as commercial papers market has suffered so much from the sudden freeze of the guarantee by some municipal government in the last October and September. So currently, Korea's economic problem is not just a problem from the abroad, but domestic problem is more severe than the problems from originated from the foreign financial market. So the consecutive freeze is very welcome, and also it would be a little bit more the prospect, as long as the prospect is not good. So I'm thinking about some reducing, rather than hiking, rather than interest hike, the reducing interest rate should be under consideration.
Sure. So the central bank focusing more on the domestic problems and challenges at the moment. And on top of the rate freeze yesterday, the BOK also said the country's economic growth outlook for this year will fall slightly below the February forecast, which is 1.6%. Now, Professor, what does that mean? Does it mean soaring consumer prices are no longer the top priority?
I agree with that. And rather than worrying about because consumer price index and the producer price index is 4.8%, and the consumer price index is 4.5 or 6%. So clearly the inflation shows some declining, but however, the economic growth and the domestic economy is really a problem. The growth rate has been, this morning the IMF just, the outlook for the South Korean economic growth rate is 1.5%, reduced from 1.7%, so even worse than the Bank of Korea's outlook. So to that regard, we've first focused on not only the problem of the negative area of balance of trade, deficit of balance of trade, and also the very weak economic activities within domestic market. That is really a serious threat.
Right. And at the same time, the central bank policymakers have left the door open for a quarter-point hike, whereas there are some market voices saying that there may be a rate cut as early as in the latter half of the year. Now, Professor, what's your point of view?
I think that is somewhat like don't expect too much about rate reduction in the future. So they are concerned about some boom, the unexpected boom from the real estate market because of expecting the lower interest rate, basic interest rate. So, but it's like a threat without any meaningful intention at all. So that is just exaggeration, I think.
Right. We'll have to wait and see. Now, the interest rate difference between South Korea and the U.S. stands at 1.5 percentage points. That's already the widest gap in around 2 decades. Now, if the Fed does push ahead with another rate hike, widening the gap, what will that mean for South Korea and the market?
Yeah, currently we have 1.5% difference or interest rate gap between U.S. and Korea. But however, it's quite a long period since we have been decoupled from each other because of the exchange rate is largely affected not by the interest rate level, but by some purchasing power or domestic economy and the prospect of growth rate. I think those parts plays more role than the interest rate. So that means as long as the prospect is good, then the dollars and the foreign investment will come into South Korea. Otherwise, it will flow out. In U.S., the problem is, even though U.S. has a prospect is a little bit good, as long as the only domestic economy is good, does not necessarily mean it produces a very financial profit to the international financial investors. So as long as the issues of future prospect and profitability depends upon both the domestic economy of U.S. and abroad, then the stock market response is always affected by whether the prospect of the U.S. economy is good or not, and also the available financial fund that is affected by the interest rate. At least the U.S. maintains some interest rate very high to keep the inflation under control. But whereas for South Korea, we don't have to worry about those interest rate gap, and then we do not pay attention to the exchange rate. So as long as the depreciation of Korean currency would be of help to the improving the balance of trade for South Korea.
Right. All right, Professor Song, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Have a lovely day.
Yeah, thank you too.
China is once again struggling with extremely severe yellow dust, which is not only a concern of Beijing, but also causing alarm for South Korea. The authorities here are bracing for poor air quality nationwide throughout the day today. Our Lee Seung-ja has more.
Yellow dust covered Beijing and other parts of China on Monday and Tuesday, with sand even piling up on streets, making it difficult for cars to pass. The yellow dust, which originated from Inner Mongolia, quickly spread to 18 regions in China, including Shanghai and Tianjin, on strong northwest winds. This is the fifth time that the country has experienced such extreme levels of yellow dust this year. China's Forestry Science Research Institute analyzed that yellow dust is appearing more often due to low rainfall in the region this year. And this is bad news for South Korea, which will see significant levels of yellow dust also flow into the country on Wednesday. During a press briefing on Tuesday, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo said the highest level of yellow dust so far this year is expected to hit the country. He advised that the elderly and people with respiratory conditions refrain from going outside, but should wear a mask if they do so. He said the yellow dust level, which was at attention level on Tuesday, would reach a caution on Wednesday. At the same time, Prime Minister Han ordered related ministries and local governments to promptly inform the public of the current situation and thoroughly implement safety measures according to the Yellow Dust Response Manual. He also called on daycare centers, kindergartens, and schools to either close or have classes shortened in order to thoroughly implement and guide safety measures to protect the children's health. He urged organizers and participants to take appropriate precautions in preparation for outdoor events such as sporting events and performances. Lee Seung-ja, Arirang News.
Korea's Jikji 심체 요절, a book about the teachings of great Buddhist priests, is the world's oldest metal print book. Part of the UNESCO Memory of the World program, the book will go on public display in France for the first time in 50 years. Our Lee Kyung-eun has this story.
Korea's Jikji 심체 요절, the world's oldest surviving book made by movable metal print, will be shown to the public in France for the first time in half a century. Starting Wednesday, April 12, the Jikji will go on display at the National Library of France as part of an exhibition on the history of printing. The last time the book was available for public viewing was exactly 50 years ago, in 1973. The Jikji is about the teachings of great Buddhist priests. The book was printed at Heungdeok Temple in Cheongju in 1377 during the Korea Kingdom. That was 78 years before the Gutenberg Bible, the earliest substantial book printed using metal type in Europe. In 2001, the Jikji was formally added to UNESCO's Memory of the World. Jikji originally consisted of 2 volumes, but only one copy of the second volume currently exists. The book was initially acquired by the first French minister to Korea in the 19th century. It was put up for auction in Paris in 1911 and then donated to the National Library of France in 1952. Ever since, it has been kept in the library storage. During the exhibition, the Gutenberg Bible and the Boa Portat, two of the other oldest printings in the world, will also be presented together. The exhibition will run for 3 months until July 16th. 이경은, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in Myanmar, where dozens of people have reportedly been killed in an airstrike launched by the military junta. According to the country's government in exile, the National Unity Government, roughly 100 people, including women and children, were killed in the village of Jikji on Tuesday local time. Other reports put the death toll closer to 50. According to eyewitnesses, a military jet dropped a bomb on people that had gathered for the opening of a new facility built by the military government's opponents. A gunship helicopter then reportedly attacked the village for 20 minutes. Myanmar's military government has not commented on the allegations. Meanwhile, in Russia, day turned to night for some residents in the far eastern Kamchatka region when a volcano erupted, spewing ash as high as 20 kilometers into the sky. The eruption of the Sivuluch volcano took place on Tuesday local time. The resulting ash cloud covered about 108,000 square kilometers, an area approximately the same size as South Korea, and buried some villages in ash as deep as 8.5 centimeters. A red aviation notice was issued over fears the ash cloud could affect aircraft flying in the area. Experts say the volcano has since calmed, and haven't ruled out further ash clouds. Now, the volcano is one of the biggest and most active in the region and last erupted in 2007. Turning over to Taiwan, where an unofficial badge worn by the self-governing island's Air Force has gone viral. It depicts a black bear holding a Taiwanese flag punching Winnie the Pooh. The cartoon character has long been used to mock Chinese President Xi Jinping due to their supposed likeness. And the Chinese government has censored references to Winnie the Pooh in social media posts. The new badge has become a symbol of defiance against Beijing, which has conducted several days of military drills around the island. The drills come after Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen met with the United States House Speaker Kevin McCarthy last week. And finally, a pair of Michael Jordan's sneakers have been sold for a record-breaking $2.2 million. The Jordan 13s were sold in an online Sotheby's auction on Tuesday for the highest price ever paid for a pair of sneakers. They were worn by the basketball legend during the athlete's final season in Game 2 of the 1998 NBA Finals. Jordan scored 37 points in the game as his team, the Chicago Bulls, went on to win 93-88 against Utah Jazz. The shoes are in good condition and feature 2 large signatures by Jordan. Last September, a jersey worn by Michael Jordan in Game 1 of the same final went under the hammer for $10.1 million.
Good morning. An unpromising start to the day weather-wise after yesterday's storm-force windy day. Now it's unbearably high levels of dust that the entire country is experiencing. Dust levels are 7 times higher than normal in the capital area, and the rest of the country is also on high alert against yellow dust with dust alerts issued. Now, northwesterly winds brought not only high levels of yellow dust, but also cold air to the country, with a cold weather advisory issued to the west of inland areas with some frost and ice being seen. Meanwhile, dry air alerts remain in place in the east along with strong winds. So please take extra precautions against wildfire. Temperatures stay below norms all day with big temperature differences between lows and highs across Korea. Then afternoon highs will be 2 to 4 degrees, lower than yesterday, with Gwangju and Busan seeing a high of 19 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Sunny skies nationwide, but avoid spending time outdoors today. Air quality remains unhealthy until tomorrow. The nationwide rain is in the forecast from late Friday into Saturday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That is all we have for today's New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Thursday's edition at the same time. Thanks for watching.